Hey there, guys. Thanks for joining me and welcome to another Holy Shed. It is the littlest parish in the whole of Christendom. And it's great to have you here with me. Hope all's well your end. I've had a pretty hectic week, to be honest, but I mean, all good. Um, Although I did take the funeral of a lovely friend, Matt, on Wednesday. An extraordinarily good guy, and I send my thoughts and prayers to his lovely kids, Liz and Richard, and yeah, so sad. We also started the Lent course on Wednesday, Resurrecting Faith, it's called, which I'm doing with my good pal Joe Davis, who has an extremely good podcast called Mid Faith Crisis. Well worth a listen. And 240 or so people have signed up for this next 6 weeks or so for this course, and an amazing spread of people, actually. I was just looking at an email that I got, which is saying that, obviously lots of people from around Great Britain, but also people have signed up from the United States, from Canada, from Australia, from France, from the Czech Republic, from New Zealand and Germany. Amazing. And there's still room for you. If you haven't signed up and you want to join, it's free with the option of making a donation. And it'd be great to have you on board. So, look, I hinted last time that for the moment I'm going to be moving on from a conspiracy of goodness as the banner or title for these particular sessions. But that doesn't mean that I'm done with it, not by a very long chalk. This phrase seems to have resonated with a lot of people, and it's become so important to me that I've decided to make it the strapline for the Holy Shed. I mean, it's why we exist, right? To foster a conspiracy of goodness and to disseminate a progressive faith aimed at helping to create a better world. I say a big amen to all of that. And guess what? On March the 22nd, the Holy Shed will be six years old. It's 6 years since the first COVID lockdown began, which is what triggered this whole thing into being. Silver linings, hey? So I would like to do something this year to mark that anniversary, and I'll let you know what I'm thinking about in the next week or two. But if you have ideas, I'd love to hear from you as well. One of the things that I really enjoy doing here in the Holy Shed, apart from yakking on and, sharing my thoughts and ideas and opinions, which is mostly what it's about, but I also like to tell you about some of my sources, the people who have influenced and do influence me on my faith journey. Many of these people, of course, are theologians, also philosophers. Some are scientists of various kinds. Some are artists and musicians or novelists. Some are just folk that I've met along the way. And, any of these people may or may not be Christians. They may be members of other faith traditions, or may be people of no faith at all. Some may describe themselves as not religious or agnostic. Some are humanists or atheists. None of that matters a hoot to me, because these are just words. They're just labels, right? These do not define who we are. And I have a very big, a ginormous vision and theology of a God who just may well be revealed, named or unnamed, in all kinds of ways, in anyone, anywhere. Because at the end of the day, all truth is God's truth. All beauty, all knowledge and wisdom, all love and justice and all these wonderful things, they're all God's. Of course they are. God has to be bigger than the confines of some little religion or church or whatever, right? We're talking about the God of the cosmos. So our religions and our churches, they're just little pinpricks, really, on this vast surface of the cosmos that God inhabits. Anyway, Hannah Arendt, who I quoted last time, is one of those people who've had an impact on me. Her name, by the way, is spelled Arendt, Arendt. She's German. She was a secular, non-religious Jew, but someone who had a deep intellectual engagement with theology and faith and stuff. Actually, with Augustine, of all people, who was the subject of her doctoral dissertation. Someone said of Hannah that her work is characterized by a nostalgia for God. I love that, because I think that's something that, you know, could fit a hell of a lot of people in this world. People who've they've walked away from religion. They've not found a home there. If they've become disaffected, and yet there's still a hole, right? There's this kind of nostalgia for God. I love that. And although the main focus of Hannah Arendt's work was the sort of political and social domain, she drew on religious concepts and categories to address all of those kinds of issues. And she did that without adhering to any particular religious dogma, but connected to theological things in a very broad way. Arendt was briefly imprisoned by the Gestapo, and after the war in 1961, she reported for the New Yorker on the trial of Adolf Eichmann. I don't know if you know who Adolf Eichmann was. I lived through that period. I remember that name looming large on sort of radio and TV reports and stuff at the time. He was one of the major organizers of the Holocaust, who was finally brought for trial in Jerusalem. She also wrote a book about his trial. And although Hannah died in 1975, I find her work and her insights are remarkably topical and relevant for our own time now, and for this particular discussion that we've been having. Naturally, Eichmann was seen as a monster. Of course he was, which is what Hannah expected to find when she went to see him and to be an attendant at his trial. But she said that what she actually encountered in Eichmann was not a monstrous demonic figure, just a mediocre bureaucrat who spoke in cliches and insisted that he was just following orders. And she found this a surprising and disturbing insight that evil can be banal. Not because it's small or insignificant, of course not, but because it can actually be routine, mindless, which in no way detracts from the guilt or responsibility of an Eichmann or anybody else, in no way diminished the diabolical nature of what he took part in and helped to shape. But her experience of encountering Eichmann resulted in a whole new line of thought for her about the nature of evil, and she wrote about this in various ways. And it was encapsulated in this phrase, which I mentioned last week, the banality of evil. The banality of evil. And I find this whole line of this whole insight really fascinating and helpful. And her core insight is that evil doesn't necessarily arise from a deeply wicked intent, but from a lack of moral reflection or critical thinking, from mindless conformity, going along with the herd, following orders. So evil becomes possible, Arendt concluded, when people surrender their judgment, to authorities, to an ideology, or to a bureaucracy. And it strikes me that this is precisely what's happening in some parts of the world today, where evil is being enacted or endorsed. Surrendering judgment to authority, to an ideology, which sometimes may be in the form of religious belief, or a bureaucracy. It's happening in the world, even as we speak. I mean, take ICE, for example, in the United States, which has become a source of terror and misery to so many people who've either been detained or fear being detained, and, who knows what. So many of my friends and contacts in the States tell the most awful stories about these masked men who just storm into people's lives and homes without a warrant and have the power to just throw them in a truck and take them away to God knows where. ICE has become the instrument of an ideology expressed at worst, I think, in hatred and violence toward those who are deemed outsiders or immigrants, even though some of these people have lived in the States for years or decades and have all the legitimate status, and yet because of their background, where they came from, the colour of their skin, or whatever it is, they're being hauled off. It's absolutely dire. Renee Good, who, of course, we all heard about in the news horribly a little while back, this lovely mother of three who was mindlessly shot dead by an ICE agent in Minneapolis, was the victim, I would say, of banal evil. Authority, ideology, and bureaucracy dehumanize, impersonalize, are blind to the personhood and humanity of the other, who, once they are reduced in that way, can be excluded, rubbed out, destroyed, whatever. But it's not just in Trump's America that these things happen. All over the world, there are regimes where inhumanity has become banal and routine, where people who are not necessarily evil are caught up in serving malevolent forces and institutions. Now, I should stress, Hannah Arendt would differentiate between an Adolf Hitler, who she saw as radically evil, not a mere bureaucrat operating in cliches, but a person with deeply evil intent who built and directed an ideological totalitarian regime of hatred and destruction. And yet she'd say that even he was a human, not a metaphysical monster, but a person fully responsible for his actions. Her point isn't that evil does not exist or that it's not absolutely awful, but that it is often banal, routine, mindless, and all the worse and scary because of that. Hannah Arendt advocated for a thoughtful, or what we may now call a mindful or examined life. This is what she said we should be moving towards, a place of thoughtfulness, by which she means mindfulness, and an examined self-critical life. To think in a mindful way is to engage in what she called an inner dialogue, a two-in-one, where we silently converse with ourselves, attending to our own inner moral judgment. To live a thoughtful life, then, is to consciously examine and critique our own actions, motives, thoughts, and impulses, and make good responses. And that's something, we don't have to be sort of architects of the Holocaust or ICE agents or anything else. This is the way of life to which we're all called, to be mindful, thoughtful people, constantly aware of the impact that we're having on other people, the decisions that we're making, and to engage in that inner process of reflection on these things. An examined life has long been recognized as being what true humanity is about. Arendt didn't address the Garden of Eden story directly, Eve choosing to eat the fruit and Adam joining in, all that kind of stuff. But she did completely reject Augustine's notion of original sin, which of course was based on his particular literalistic reading of Genesis 3. And the great sadness, I think, is the way that his constructed framework of original sin has become so devastating and far-reaching, embedding itself, into the very character of so much of Christian tradition and thinking, as if it were a fact or an obvious interpretation of the story, which it isn't. Now, I've written and talked in the past about why what we sometimes call the good book, the Bible, requires good reading if its goodness is going to be understood and seen and manifest. And by good reading, I mean an intelligent, nuanced approach that isn't bound by pre-packed theological ideological assumptions, but engages with the subtleties of the different natures and genres of text that are contained in Scripture. To me, instead of reading the mythical language of Genesis as literal fact, it should be seen as symbolic, pointing to timeless archetypal truths about the human condition. Someone has said that the thing about myth is that it never happened, but it always happens, because it's pointing to these sort of timeless archetypal truths. But because they come in that format of, perhaps a narrative as it does in Genesis, or in a poetic form, whatever, its subtleties need to be engaged with, because literalism is a terrible thing. It enslaves the human spirit and causes religion to lose its sensitivity to the poetic, nature of life in the world, by flattening the text into dogmatic facts, which is what fundamentalists do, is what fundamentalism does, flattening the text into dogmatic facts. Fundamentalists miss the deeper meaning, because literalism, I would say, is a brutal lack of imagination. Yeah, it's a numbing and deadening of those more sensitive, poetic perceptions that are part of the human imagination, without which life would just be awful. It would just be a machine. I mean, maybe I'll do a shed or two or three looking in more depth at Genesis, because I think it's so fundamental. So many of the problems, as I see it with Christianity, stem from those early chapters of Genesis, because they are, I mean, Genesis means beginning, and it is the beginning of so much. And I think it's because of misunderstandings about those, especially the early chapters, that we end up with such a lot of distortion. So I think, maybe we'll look in more depth at Genesis, but very much in keeping with the sort of insights of Hannah Arendt. I see the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as symbolic of the beginning of moral consciousness. I've been saying that, haven't I, in recent sheds? But it's so important. I want to say it again and again and underline it. I see that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as symbolic of the beginning of moral consciousness, that which gives us the capacity for moral thought and judgment. I mean, if you've not eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, how can you know? How can you make moral judgments? And it's that sort of capacity for moral thought and judgment which facilitates the inner dialogue that Hannah Arendt talks about, that inner dialogue of thinking, which places upon us the awareness of responsibility that is so essential to our humanity. Before Eve and then Adam ate the fruit, there was innocence, no reflective awareness of good and evil. And then after eating, there was awareness and obligation to judge, discern, and most importantly, behave responsibly. The thing about Eve is, in the story, she boldly questioned what she was told, even by God. Now, don't miss the irony in that. Don't literalize it to the point that you miss the irony. This is a woman who, had the boldness to question this great authority that, she was under. And clearly this resulted in a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the capacity to know good and evil, that opened up the door to becoming fully human. I mean, it had to happen if the narrative wasn't to end up as a fairy tale. But it also led to suffering, insecurity, pain and death, and yes, evil. And I think the judgments of God that we kind of read about in that story are more statements of consequences, really. because, there's always a consequence. It's a story. Hey, it's a story. But within the imaginative world of that story, I'm glad that Eve and then Adam ate of the fruit. I don't know what would have happened otherwise. It signifies and points to our capacity to live in a world in which, well, there's a crack in everything, as Leonard Cohen said. But then that's how the light gets in. I love the fact that I'm a moral agent, that I have freedom to choose and decide, that I can think critically, make judgments, or make bad choices, or choose not to think about it all and just go along to get along. I'm glad that it's a world in which I have those choices, but I also have the capacity to change my mind, repent, to go a different way, become more fully aware and awake to who and what I wish to be and what my inner being is telling me that life is really about. So, writing all of this large, I could say that we live in a world where joy and beauty and goodness and love exist alongside malice, hatred and misery, but that it is the privilege of being fully human. I have the ability to choose, to make the world better in some tiny way, and collectively we have the possibility of creating a conspiracy of goodness. Collectively we have the possibility of repairing the world, making it better, more just and compassionate, more how God wishes it to be. I, for one, wouldn't have it any other way to this. Who wants to exist, and I say exist, not truly live, in a place of blind innocence? That would be subhuman. It was no different in the time of Jesus, of course. Banal evil was a big part of what resulted in him being arrested, tried, and then executed, murdered, killed on the cross. I mean, isn't this perhaps what he meant by forgive them for they know not what they do? They're not thinking about what they're doing. Didn't the centurion suddenly come to, wake up to the evil he had been part of by doing what he'd been told, when he suddenly shakes into a place of wakefulness and says, surely this was the Son of God. We've done a great evil here. But it wasn't necessarily done by each of them with evil intent. There was a banality about it. There was a going along. There was a doing our duty. There was following the crowd. Wasn't it a moment of inner dialogue that caused Judas to suddenly see what he'd done and tragically hang himself because he couldn't bear the pain of what he'd done, that he had been caught up in the banality of greed, which drove him to the evil that he committed. But look, I mean, even then, there was more than enough forgiveness for Judas. Of course there was. It's interesting that Jude, which is a derivation of Judas, that Saint Jude is the patron saint of lost causes. I love that. Judas wasn't ultimately a lost cause. And I for one believe he fell into the arms of God's love and forgiveness, but that's just the way I'm thinking about it. Throughout his ministry, Jesus called people to wake up, to think critically about the world that shaped them, come alive to themselves and to God. Why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? He asked the crowd. It's a call for moral and spiritual responsibility, challenging people to use their own inner compass rather than outsourcing their judgment to others. Why do you not judge for yourselves what's right? Or he said, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. Yeast representing the pervasive and corrupting influence of those leaders' teachings and influences. Or do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. And so it goes on. You know, his entire teaching style was a form of critical pedagogy. You know, in other words, a sort of a practical teaching that came through the means of conveying critical thinking. He taught with enigmatic parables and questions, you know, not like literalistic questions, A and B and black and white, but no, he used parables and questions to get them to think for themselves, provoke them to use their knowledge of good and evil, if you want to put it that way, to make better decisions. I think Jesus is the great teacher of critical thinking, of stepping outside of the bubble, the religious bubble or any other bubble or any other kind of conformity, and being true to your own inner instincts, instead of just going along with, you know, the crowd or with doctrinal conventions or whatever. It's hard. I grant you it is hard to put your hand up and say, hang on a minute. But that's what it means to wake up, to use that capacity that we have, you know, to make better decisions. Jesus consistently prioritized human needs and compassion over rigid literal applications of religious laws. That's just a perpetual theme throughout, that he was constantly saying, get out of your little literalistic sort of readings of things, the legalisms, and see that what it's all there for. You know, he did say, didn't he, that the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. He sort of said, get this the right way round. He focused on the spirit of the law over black and white interpretations, and he practiced radical inclusion of those who were marginalized by the religious establishment. Jesus basically wasn't a fundamentalist. I mean, you know that though, don't you? Jesus wasn't a fundamentalist. Now, actually, there's a pretty good title for a future Holy Shed. I don't have to wonder too much, following this line of thought, I don't have to wonder too much what Jesus would say to our bishops and the synod generally in the LLF debate in the Church of England, or how he would treat people in the LGBTQ plus community. Don't have to think about that too much. I want to finish with a wonderful little fictitious story which I found on the YouTube channel of Justice Denied, which I want to give a big shout out for, Justice Denied. They produce some great video material, and the story speaks very effectively for itself. And for me, it not only points to the danger of banal evil, but is also a very powerful challenge to foster a conspiracy of goodness within ourselves and out of that in our communities. So I'm going to play this, and if you're only listening rather than watching it on video, it doesn't matter because you'll get the story anyway.
You there, second desk, blue jacket. What is your name?
My name is Alexis.
Alexis, please leave my lecture room. I don't want to see you at one of my lectures ever again.
I don't understand.
I am not going to ask a second time. Thank you. Why are there laws? What are laws for? Anyone?
Social order?
To protect a person's personal rights.
So that you can rely on the government?
Justice? Thank you. Tell me, was I unfair to your classmate just now? Indeed I was. So, Why didn't any of you protest? Why didn't any of you try and stop me? Why didn't you want to prevent this injustice? You see, what you have just learnt, you wouldn't have understood in 1,000 hours of lectures unless you lived it. You didn't say anything because you weren't affected yourself. And this attitude speaks against you and against life. You think it doesn't concern you, so it's none of your business. Well, I'm here to say, if you don't help bring about justice, then one day you too may experience injustice, and there will be nobody there to stand before you. Truth and justice lives through us all, and we must fight for it. Because in life and work, I mean, we often live next to each other, but not with each other. We console ourselves that the problems of others are nothing to do with us, none of our business. And we go home glad at night that we're spared, but it's about standing up for each other. Every day an injustice happens in business, sport, or on the tram. Relying on someone else to take care of it is not good enough. It is our duty to be there for others, to speak up for others when they cannot. I am here to teach you the power of your voice. I want you to learn critical thinking to empower you to stand up for what is right, even if it means going against what everyone else is doing. Let's begin.
My goodness, I could have just played that really, couldn't I? It embodies so much of what I've just been trying to say. And I think it's an important point that it's when we speak up that a conspiracy can begin to take life, that it can take wings, that it can begin to happen. Because otherwise we're all just looking at each other. So here's a prayer which is called Multicoloured God. Multicoloured God, all races, all cultures mirror your spectacular likeness. With holy pride and audacity, the rainbow family manifests your quirky, queer handiwork. All creation revels in your kaleidoscopic glory, dancing on the grave of drab uniformity. Tiger beetles dressed to kill, a tufted titmouse with a quiff that Tintin himself would die for. Mandarin fish, flamingos, and flamboyant peacock spiders each speak to your magnificent feral ingenuity. May your liberating grace overwhelm our world of fear, that we may discover you in every face, however different from our own, in every shape, size, and colour of your variegated world filled with splendour. May the song of all creation resound the good news. God is all and in all. Amen. So hey, if you've got a drink handy, just raise a glass or a mug or whatever with me, would you? And let's toast critical thinking. The ability and the willingness to step out of the bubble and to put our hand up or put our foot out or whatever it is, to say, that's not who I am, this is who I want to be. It's all about life or death, you know. To life, l'chaim. So, if you like what I'm doing here in the Holy Shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee, which hopefully will be a bit warmer than this one I've got. And we're very, very grateful to all those of you who support us through that means and other ways too. It's all much appreciated. And basically just a couple of things really. One, just to remind you of this Lent course that we're doing, Resurrecting Faith. You can find a notice about it on my Facebook page, or you can just Google it and you'll find it. And that's just about it. I'm off to Scargill tomorrow for the whole of this week. I'll be up at Scargill House in Yorkshire, leading a course on the subject of creating grown-up churches. And I really look forward to that. And of course, then a bit later on, after that, the following week, I'm at Amadown, doing the course on faith, hope, and DEI, living for a better world. There's still places for that. If you're free, it'd be great to have you there. And that's just about it, really. Thanks for being with me. Whatever you're doing this week, be mindful. Be mindful of what's going on around and within yourself. And stay human at all costs, because that's what it's all about. Living, incarnating that humanity that God gave to us, which is, at the end of the day, all about love and compassion and justice. So have a great week. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you soon.